Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Today we're looking at Chapter 7 of the Ethics, of Book 3, Chapter 7. We're continuing on the question of courage, and today's topic is what is frightening, the question of the frightening. Because remember, courage is in relationship to fear, but it's not simple fear, but what is frightening, and that is particularly the greatest, the noblest things, right? Now let's continue this. What is frightening is not the same for all, and we say that there is a certain frightening thing that is too much for human beings to bear. There are some things that are going to be there are certain frightening things that are just too much for human beings to bear. This is frightening to everyone. Then, at least to everyone who has sense. Okay, is in the sense, this idea. Whereas this. Just go look at this for a second. My Aristotle here. Oh, I'm going crazy. So just look at this. Well, he didn't do it. He didn't put sense on its own. Okay, because this would have been good to have the notification of what's sense and what's nonsense, right? Um, Anyone who has sense. Whereas the frightening things that are within the scope of what humanly bearable differs in multitude, that is, in being greater or lesser, and similarly to do the things that inspire confidence differ. In other words, there are some things that it's beyond all human. Some things that are it's basically beyond human the possibility of a human being to bear. But there are things frightening to everyone. Then this is frightening to everyone who has sense, right? These kind of things are frightening. Whereas there are frightening things that are within the scope of what humanity that is humanly bearable now, but they differ in multitude. Some things are being greater, and some things lesser. Like and other things too, to the things that inspire confidence differ. In other words, that you're not afraid of, that you're not afraid of, that things that you can be afraid of, and things that you're not afraid of. In other words, there's a difference degree. Some things are very easily you don't easily fear. In other words, it's very difficult. You do fear it more hard. That it's harder for you. It's things that are more difficult to bear. You fear them more than those that are less difficult to bear. Things that don't really fear, you can have more confidence over, versus things that you don't have confidence over. Things that you fear that you don't feel that you can overcome. Right. So that's this where there's being greater and lesser, right, of magnitude. So what is bearable either to a greater degree or a lesser degree. And your confidence about this, the opposite of the situation, depends upon to the degree you think you can bear it or overcome it, right? But the courageous man is undaunted as a human being can be. So he's undaunted. In other words, he is not overcome by the sense of being helpless, right? His fear. He will fear things of this sort. In other words, he's aware that he says, okay, they're bad, they're dangerous, it's difficult. I know that I don't like. It's not. I don't enjoy it. I'm not going to enjoy doing it. It's not something you acknowledge the danger. If you don't sense, if you're just doing it, you don't care. Like you go through it like nothing's bad at all. You're senseless in that sense. That's not courage. That is, you're just insensible to the danger. This is not courage. He will fear things of this sort, but he will endure them in a way that he ought, and as reason, logos commands. And for the sake of the noble, the kolos, the beautiful, the good, the noble, for this is the end of virtue. In other words, the end of virtue is the noble and the good. the good, the noble, the beautiful. This is what you're accomplishing. You're going to be doing this act in order that it's the act. The end is you're doing it in a way that is beautiful. It is just. It is noble in that sense, right? For the sake of the noble, or the kalos, the beautiful and the noble. For this is the end of it. It is possible to fear these things more or less, and one ought to, right? And further, to fear things that are not frightening as they were. In other words, it is possible to fear these things more or less than one ought to, right? And further, to fear things that are not frightening as if they were. In other words, there's the opposite. It is possible to fear things more than they should be or less than they should be, right? You have this is the things that should be feared. You have feared. The things that are fearable. You can neither fear more or fear less, right? And and further to fear things that are not frightening, things that we shouldn't be frightened about, okay? As if they were erroneous, right? One of the errors that arise is to fear what one ought not, and another to fear in a way one ought not. And yet another is to fear what one ought not, or something of this sort. In other words, there's this one thing. Okay, there's three errors here. One of the errors is to fear what one ought not. You shouldn't fear it. That arises is to fear what one ought not. Another is to fear in a way one should not fear. In other words, the way you fear. And another is to fear when one ought not to. And something of this. In other words, the time. It's not the right time to do it, or the right circumstances. In other words, the first thing is what is it? He to fear what one ought not. The thing that is feared. You should not fear the thing. In other words, what is feared? This is something you should. One error is you're fearing the wrong thing. You're fearing it in the wrong way. So the thing itself, how you're fearing, and last, the time you're doing it, when it is feared. In other words, fear when one ought not. So the three conditions: what is being feared, how, and when. The case is similar also with things that inspire confidence. So here, that he then who endures and fears what he ought, and for the sake of what he ought, and in the way he ought, and when, and who is similarly confident as well, is courageous. In other words, it's not only the question of fearing it, but also you have confidence, a level of confidence, right? So that therefore there is a kind of a sense that he who endures and fears what he ought, and for the sake of what he ought, and in a way he ought, and when and who is similarly who, and at the same time he and who is similarly at this confident as well. This is courageous. In other words, it's fearing, but is still having enough confidence to act in response to this, right? For the courageous man suffers and acts in accords with what is worthy and as reason would command. So, in other words, he suffers. In other words, he suffers and acts in accord with what is correct, worth doing, worthy, and as reason. The words logic here, the rationale commands. Moreover, the end of every activity. Moreover, the end of every activity is that which accords with the characteristic. So therefore, the end of the activity is an accord, meaning agrees with, aligned. It fits. Accord versus discord, right? It is in harmonious with, accord with what the end is, right? The characteristic should be time. The In other words, the end of that activity is in accord with the characteristics, and so the courageous man, and to the courageous man, courage is noble, kalos, right? Raslow suggests an alternative vision. Raslow, in his editing of this, this is also the case for the courageous man, and courage is noble. So therefore, there's two readings here. Raslow and his suggests the alternative, and this is also the case for the courageous man, that and courage is noble. And to the courageous man, courage is kolon, and noble, beautiful. It is inspiring in that sense, right? For the sake of the beautiful, the noble, kolon. Therefore, the courageous man endures and does what accords with virtue. In other words, he does what is required of who has courage. In that sense, the courageous man endures. So it's in other words, what is courage? It is having the appropriate fear to the appropriate action and to the appropriate when, the what, when, and how. And fearing it properly, but also still being confident that you can respond to it, and doing, nevertheless acting, not succumbing to the fear. It's the difference between courage is not fearing; it is properly fearing, but knowing you can still acting in response to the fear. And therefore, the courageous man is one who endures and does what accords, what is in agreement with what courage is. As for those who are marked by excess, he who exceeds in fearlessness is nameless. It's nameless. There's no name. It was previously said by us that many characteristics are nameless. But someone would be mad or insensitive to pain if he should fear nothing, neither earthquake, floods, as people claim about the Celts. So therefore, in other words, the Celts are said to be the people who don't fear anything, that they're senseless to these things. Pardon. Pardon. Bad habit. I should stop the screen. But he who exceeds in confidence when it comes to frightening things is reckless. And the reckless person is held to be both a boaster and a pretender to courage. At any rate, as the courageous man actually is respect to frightening things, so the reckless man wishes to appear to be, so that he looks like he's, in other words, he wishes to appear to be. In other words, the reckless man is a boaster. He pretends to courage. The argument, at any rate, as the courageous man actually is. In other words, he understands what is frightening and does it nevertheless, and is respect to frightening things. So the reckless person wishes to appear to be. The circumstances in which he is able to do so, when he imitates the courageous, in other words, in the circumstances in which he's able to do so, he then imitates in other words, the reckless one is one who it's imitating the courageous man, but it's accident in that sense. Aristotle said, in the circumstances in which he's able to do that, to imitate this, do what he does, he imitates this. Hence, the majority of them are in fact reckless cowards. For though they are reckless when circumstances permit it, they do not endure frightening. See that again? This is the irony. They're not frightened. They're not really frightening. So they're not responding to fear. He's saying. So therefore, if they were frightening, they'd probably be cowards, reckless cowards. They're reckless. This is that weird thing. He's not naming them, but he's saying he's kind of shaming them at a certain level. Those who are not properly feared, they don't, and it's only accidental because they're not fearful. In other words, it appears to be their reckless boldness is because they're not sensible they're not fearing what they should fear. So this is reckless in that sense. And in fact, if they were probably fearful, they would probably not act. Right? This is the thing. For though they are reckless where circumstance permitted, they would not endure frightening things. He who exceeds in being fearful is a coward, for he fears what one ought not, and in a way one ought not, and all the things of the sort that follow. In other words, the coward is one who is what excesses of fear. He succumbs to excess fear, and he fears what one ought not, and in a way one ought not, and all the things that follow from this. He is also deficient in feeling confidence, but it is in his exceeding in feeling pain that he's more conspicuous. So it's not he lacks confidence. In other words, he is deficient in feeling confidence, but it's his excessive fear of feeling pain. He's more. He's more. He is more. In other words, it's an X. In other words, this is that line. This is what he in his exceeding in feeling pain that he's conspicuous. His conspicuousness is that he senses the pain. He wants to avoid it. He's afraid of the pain. And he's so afraid of the pain that he seeks to avoid it at all costs, right? The coward, therefore, is someone of faint hope, for he fears everything. The courageous man is the opposite, since he feels confident. Since to feel confident is to be of good hope. In other words, he has hope. In other words, the coward has no hope. He has no hope. He doesn't see. He's going to be pain is going to be bad. I want to avoid it. I want to avoid it, man. And whereas the courageous person is the opposite. He has some hope. He thinks it's possible to avoid it. It is that if I can if I resist, maybe yes, maybe there might be pain, but I could also avoid it, the bad, the shameful, and the horrible. Right? There's no hope versus there's to be feel confident is to be of good hope. It's interesting that being of good hope allows for confidence to a certain degree. The coward, the reckless, that is the one who's the coward, the one who succumbs to fear, the reckless who has no fear, and the courageous are concerned with the same thing, but they differ in relation to them. So they're concerned with the same thing, fear. Fear of something that's going to be bad. But they differ in their relationship. The former two exceed and are deficient, respectively. So the coward and the reckless, these are what they. And actually, this is interesting. The coward is what he succumbs. In other words, he he exceeds in having too much fear. He doesn't. He's too over. He just fear just overpowers him. You can't act in that sense. He's just unable to. He's in other words, too much fear. He fears too much when he maybe ought not to. And the reckless is he doesn't fear when he should. He is not sensible to what he should fear and how he should fear, right? Deficient, respectively. Whereas the latter holds to the middle. In other words, the courageous one holds to the mean, the middle position, as the way he ought to. He should fear. He should fear who, what, and where in the right way, the right degree, but at the same time have confidence. Holds to the middle and the way he ought. The reckless are also impetuous. The reckless are impetuous, and though prior, um, they're impetuous. Impetuous means I just go, no caution, no care. They just move. There's yeah, no restraint, no restraint. They're impetuous, and though prior to the dangers they were willing, in the midst of them they withdraw. In other words, prior to the dangers they are willing, right? In that sense, they're reckless. But in the midst of them, they kind of withdraw, whereas the courageous men are keen in the deeds but quiet beforehand. So, in other words, that they're in the middle. In other words, in the reckless is almost at the beginning of it, boom. But in the middle of it, they're kind of maybe when they become aware and they all of a sudden the reality of the situation gets a hold of them and they say, "Oh fuck! Oh my God, this is worse than I thought it was." No, I didn't have a good judgment of what was there. I didn't fear it, but now I'm experiencing it, and the fear is there, and therefore it is like this. That prior to the danger they're willing, but in the midst of them they withdraw. Whereas the courageous men are keen in the deeds, but are quiet before. This is the metaphor, the difference. The courageous man is not going to be the guy who's boasting. He's going to be the guy who is going to be, oh, I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to do this. This is bad. This is bad. But then when it's in the middle of it, he's doing it, right? It's the boaster is the one is the reckless. But then in the middle of it, he kind of falls down. In accord with what has been said, then, courage is a means with respect to what inspires confidence and fear in the situation spoken of. And it chooses and endures what it does because it is beautiful, noble to do so, or because it is shameful not to. It is, in other words, two things. It's double sense. It is beautiful or noble to do stuff, to do this, to endure. Or it is the opposite, shameful. That to not to endure would be to not to do this. To do this is not that dying is noble, but the fact that you did not choose to fight and not resist and maybe not die is a shameful thing in that sense. That not doing that in that sense. So it's not only whether you choose, it chooses and endures what it does, not only because of the noble, but also to avoid shame. But dying in order to flee poverty, erotic love, or something painful is not the mark of the courageous man, but of the coward. In other words, I'm dying in order to escape poverty, erotic dying rather to suffer, avoid erotic love. And I choose to die rather than suffer pain is not the mark of a courageous man, but a coward. For it is softness to flee suffering. In other words, if you're doing it to flee suffering, such a person endures death not because it is noble to do so, but in order to avoid a bad thing. That's in other words, if you're choosing death rather than suffering. In other words, you're not choosing death because it's the noble thing. You're you're choosing it, or you do so, but in order to avoid something you hate more. You don't want to. What he's saying, he doesn't want to be in poor. You don't want to suffer poverty. You don't want to uh, um, you don't want to suffer poverty. You don't want to erotic love in that sense, or something painful. This is not something. In other words, you're suffering of something very bad. You choose death rather than suffering the death. This is the idea. Okay, maybe this is even in other words, the person who has a fatal disease and very painful suffering disease, and they choose the death. This is cowardice in Aristotle's view. In other words, it is. It is. Yes, you're going to die. You're dying. You're suffering, but you don't want to suffer, and therefore you flee. You choose death to avoid suffering. This is cowardly, from Aristotle's point of view. So choosing death when you should resist it. Choose life in that sense. This is the idea. Oh my God, this is kind of Catholic. Well, it is. This is where the Catholic Church gets their view of Aristotelian's conception of courage. Actually, is where we can say the Church kind of gets its position regarding suicide and things like this. Suicide is not noble in this sense. It's not worthy. It's not. Okay, maybe we can understand it in terms of the pity, but it's not something choice worthy. In other words, it's something that is a product of maybe your fear. It is a product of fear. This is done not of courage. Killing oneself is not courageous. Unless, this is different. The Romans would kill themselves. Why? Because not dying would be, in that situation, would be suffering something base. So yes, you're trying to do that, but it's something ignoble. Roman gentlemen, Roman rulers would often commit suicide, not because they were fearful of the pain or that. It was something that they wanted to avoid something dishonorable, on something base, becoming something base. This is the question of Socrates. It's Socrates agreeing to die and not fleeing. Was this is because he wanted to avoid, but tried if he continued living when the city condemned him, he would cease being good. He would maybe do something bad, and therefore he chose to die. Thus, it wasn't kind of cowardice, avoiding something. It was avoiding something base. It's not just mere pain. It's not pain. It's not that state. In other words, certain states and certain things are kind of like, they're not the highest, and they're not things that we should be fearful of. It is the state we try to avoid is something that we should fear. That is truly not good, not noble, not beautiful. And this is how we end this in that sense. So softness, it is from softness to fleeing suffering. Such a person endures death not because it is beautiful to do so, but in order to avoid a bad thing. So we'll stop here. Put your comments, questions in this thing here, and I will respond to them when I see them. Please, again, if you've liked it, hit the like button, hit share it, hit the like button, share it with friends, share it in social media, share that gets spread it wide, help the algorithm up, maybe gets us more attention. Maybe some people will see it from this point. If you are not subscribed, please subscribe. If you know somebody who might be interested in introducing to the channel, and encouraging them to subscribe, because as we grow big, we get more of the privileges. If you didn't like it, okay, you can always hit the thumbs down button, but say why. Because why? What's wrong? Maybe you can correct me, and you can say, I did something wrong or said something wrong, and then you can correct me, and therefore people who watch the video can learn something by watching the correction, or I can learn, too, as well. That's the whole point of this. Next but not last, next is if you want to follow me on social media, you can do so through the links below. You can follow what I do on social various. I'm kind of, the various social media activities. I'm not that much of a social media. I used to be more. I have some accounts that I rarely go to, and it's kind of like, okay. Next is my academic social media. Those who want to know more about me as a scholar, a researcher, look at my research and things like that. You can do that. This academic social media below that. If you want to help me to do what I do, well, aside from going to my academic social media to find my university email address, and you can always send me a Google card or something, something, a Amazon card or something like that by using the email, or you can do so by becoming a member. Do subscribe to our Patreon. Kind of contributions, as being a Patreoner. People say, we don't really do much on Patreon. Well, that's because I don't have a network. If I had a network of people, I would do more, but this is the way it is. Please go check it. It's worth doing in that sense, helps everything grow in that sense. Another way you can do so is buying one of my books that's there below. Um, the one that really helps the most is buying the Lulu one, the Notebook on Aristotle's Politics. Those of you interested in it, and maybe no student or studying it, politics, you want to get the guide going through it. If you buy it by Lulu, I get the bookstore's profit. But if you want to order it through Amazon or your local bookstore, Amazon, Barnes and Noble online server, or through your local bookstore, please do so. Buy it for a friend yourself. If you're not yourself, then buy it for a colleague or for a friend that you think will benefit from this. Well, we will continue chapter 8 with courage again. We'll continue courage. So we'll stop here now today and see you again. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good day. See you.